We're entering the Appomattox courthouse where the meeting happened between the General Grant and General Lee. So we're entering into that parking lot. We're going to stop our car and then we'll go inside the courthouse and see the place where they met.
In early April 1865, federal forces under Grant had finally broken through General Robert E. Lee's lines. After 9.5 months, the siege of Petersburg was over. Lee was forced to retreat and abandon the Confederate capital of Richmond. Grant moved with him, and the race was on. Lee was hoping to join forces with General Joseph Johnston's army in North Carolina. Grant knew the importance of not letting the two forces join, so he kept blocking the Confederate escape routes south. For a week, the two armies clashed every day, and Lee's forces took unsustainable losses. It was at Appomattox Station where a division of Grant's cavalry under General George Custer finally dashed in front of Lee, blocking his way. On April 8th, federal forces captured 25 pieces of artillery and 1,000 prisoners at the Battle of Appomattox Station. The next morning, Lee tried to fight his way out. For a moment, an escape route seemed open just west of Appomattox Courthouse. But the open door was slammed shut by a column of 25,000 federal infantry, including some 5,000 United States colored troops. Confederate Lieutenant Charles Minigorode was cut down in the battle.
My darling mother, I am dying, but I have fallen where I expected to fall. Our cause is defeated, but I do not live to see the end of it. I suffer agonies, but to God I could die calmly.
Minigorode was one of the last casualties. Despite his serious wound, he survived. The ragged remnants of the Army of Northern Virginia were now effectively surrounded. Between the two armies was Appomattox Courthouse. It was a small place in a tobacco farming area. A few dozen structures clustered around the Richmond-Lynchburg Stage Road. A general store, a tavern and guest house, slave quarters and blacksmith shops. Perhaps 100 people in all. In this town, as in most of the South, life was based on farming. And farming was often based on slavery. Over half the people in the county were enslaved. What was about to happen in McLean's parlor would change their lives forever. It would change everything. Appomattox had seen little of the Civil War that had raged for 4 years. The war had divided the nation and killed over 700,000 Americans. April 9th, 1865. At about 10 o'clock in the morning, federal soldiers saw a lone horseman approaching. He carried a white flag of truce. Late that morning, Lee sat down to rest under an apple tree.
I have here a message from General Grant for General Lee.
He was waiting for a response from Grant. For 3 days, the two generals had exchanged notes.
I shall see to it that he gets this immediately.
Thank you, Colonel.
In the last one, Lee used the word surrender. Grant asked Lee to pick a place where they could meet. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Marshall of Lee's staff went into the village and chose the home of Wilmer McLean. At about 1 in the afternoon, Lee went inside and waited in the parlor. It was about 1:30 when Grant arrived with his staff. They had ridden more than 20 miles. Grant's trousers were tucked into his muddy boots. A federal officer remembered that General Lee was dressed in a new uniform. His tall, commanding form contrasted strongly with the short figure of General Grant, clothed in a soiled uniform. To Grant, Lee was a man of great dignity. For a while, they chatted in a friendly way. Then, Lee asked Grant to write out terms of surrender. Grant bent solemnly over his order book. He was writing the words that would define not only a surrender, but the peace to come. Ulysses S. Grant and Robert E. Lee were the supreme generals of an epic war. That day at Appomattox, both generals acted as catalysts for peace. Each had a vital choice to make, a choice that would resonate in history. Lee's choice had come early that morning when a fellow officer suggested they let the army scatter. After all, Confederate President Jefferson Davis had called for guerrilla warfare. But Lee saw what that would mean. The country would be full of lawless bands, he said. It would take years to recover. Lee would take defeat instead. Grant's finest hour came now, as he wrote the terms of surrender. The plans laid on the River Queen would come to fruition. Lincoln's heart was tenderness throughout, an eyewitness said. As long as the rebels laid down their arms, he did not care how it was done. Now, at Appomattox, Grant carried out the president's wish. Each Confederate soldier would have to promise not to take up arms again. But this done, Grant wrote, each officer and man will be allowed to return to their homes, not to be disturbed by the United States. Grant paroled the Confederate soldiers, all of them. Now Lee came forth with a special request. Many of his men owned their horses. Could they take their animals back to their farms? Grant knew how essential a horse could be for a farmer. He consented to Lee's request, and then he gave rations to the hungry Confederates. This will do much toward conciliating our people, Lee said. Each man had made his choice, hoping to end the war with civility and mercy for all. Grant signed his terms and Lee his acceptance. It was 3 p.m. on Palm Sunday, April 9th, 1865, and it was over.
Joseph, so tell us about a little bit about this building.
So this building is the McLean House. It is a reconstruction of the original building where the surrender terms were signed and accepted between General Ulysses S. Grant and General Robert E. Lee. This building is not the original. It was actually deconstructed in 1892 to be moved to Washington, D.C., but that fell through when the group doing it ran out of money. And it kind of was left for about 50 years before the National Park Service was given this land in 1948, where we began to reconstruct the house from what was left of the materials that had been left behind.
Okay, thank you so much. Where the agreement was written with General Lee and General Grant on the right side. And this is the painting. Showing General Lee on the left and General Grant on the right, signing the agreement.